As the evening settles in, let's travel back in time to the echoing stone corridors of a medieval manor, one of those great drafty places where the fireplaces are massive, but the warmth rarely reaches your toes. The air smells faintly of rushes and tallow, and the hum of quiet conversation hovers beneath the sound of spinning wheels. If this story helped you relax even just a little, or bored you enough to make you sleepy, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Thank you for being here. You step cautiously across the floor, trying not to trip over a basket of wool. Around you, a half circle of noblewomen sits near the hearth, wrapped in thick cloaks and thicker opinions. Their hands are busy, threading, knotting, weaving. But their eyes flick up now and then, scanning the room like falcons in wimples. You're in a place of worship, yes, but to rumor, not God. Because here, amid the clack of looms and the scent of lavender-stuffed sachets, tapestry gossip is alive and well. You take a seat near the edge of the group, and right away, someone leans in. "Did you hear?" she whispers, "about Lady Cecily's goose-shaped birthmark?" Her loom creaks like a knowing accomplice, and just like that, you're initiated. Tapestry weaving in this era isn't just a hobby. It's a social platform, a memory device, and, let's be honest, a medieval version of a group chat. Though the finished works may later hang above a king's table or cover a monastery wall, their origins are deeply, hilariously human. You watch a girl thread indigo silk through the warp. She frowns, unpicks, and redoes it with more flair this time. The figure she's stitching might look like a saint from afar, but up close, it strongly resembles the local priest, with rather exaggerated ears. That's not an accident. Historians still argue whether some of these motifs were intentional satire or just happenstance. But when you see a red-haired knight tripping over his own sword in 3 different tapestries across 2 counties, well, coincidence starts to look suspicious. The workshop leader, a woman named Agnes, coughs delicately into her sleeve. She once embroidered a scene of the Annunciation with a hidden lizard in Mary's robes, because, as she put it, "My cousin says she saw the devil once and he looked just like a lizard." Everyone had a good laugh, except the priest. The looms creak in rhythm, like 100 whispering chairs. Each tap of the shuttle is a punctuation mark. The women don't always talk. Sometimes the silence is louder, especially when someone's pattern changes mid-week. "You're doing St. Ursula now?" someone murmurs to the woman beside you. "I thought you were working on Judith and Holofernes." A shrug. "Judith's been giving me trouble." Everyone knows that's code for "someone's husband looked at me too long over supper." And just like that, a story unspools, wider than any tapestry. One surprisingly mainstream fact: by the 14th century, tapestries had become one of the primary ways noble households displayed wealth, culture, and taste. But what the inventories don't show is the murmured laughter behind the scenes, how the women creating these lush textiles wove in little gestures of revenge, humor, or solidarity. The scenes weren't always biblical or courtly. Sometimes they were strangely specific: a fishmonger with a chipped tooth, a lady's maid with an unmistakable braid, even the family cat, who had once scandalously given birth in the chapel, immortalized forever in silk. No one ever said anything aloud. But when the Baroness walked by and saw herself suspiciously near a basket of spilled apples in the Virtues of Eve panel, she began ordering her fruit from a different village. Of course, not all gossip was malicious. Sometimes It was protective. The elderly weaver, named Isolde, who smelled faintly of nettletea and disappointment, once embroidered a tiny protective rune into the hem of her niece's wedding gift, just in case. You lean in closer to one tapestry in progress. It's massive, depicting the legendary siege of Troy, or rather, a medieval reimagining of it. The ships look suspiciously like English fishing vessels, and one of the Greek warriors is definitely wearing a hat that only Master Thomas the Baker owns. That's bold, even by local standards. A thread snaps. No one moves. Everyone knows it's bad luck when a red thread breaks. Agnes mutters a charm under her breath. You pretend not to hear it. The cold creeps back in through the stone. Someone passes you a warmed rock wrapped in linen, an old trick for keeping hands nimble in winter. The fire flickers lower, and still the gossip goes on. Someone is telling the story of a tapestry that was taken down just after it was finished. Too many coincidences, apparently. A bishop with a mole in the exact right spot. A nobleman's wife with a surprisingly freckled ankle. Everyone pretended it was just a shepherdess, but nobody bought it. You smile. You won't survive long in this world without learning to read between the stitches. Let the evening hush surround you. Find your calm, and together we'll step softly into the story ahead. Your eyes are adjusting now. The flickering light from the hearth, the dull sheen of dyed wool, the soft scrape of thread. Together, they begin to lull you into that peculiar rhythm of time that only seems to exist in places where gossip is measured in patterns, not minutes. You lean closer to a nearly finished panel that's been carefully pinned to a large standing frame. It shows a hunting scene. Stags bounding through a stylized forest, hounds mid-leap, and nobles on horseback. All very proper, very chivalric. Until you spot a tiny detail. One of the riders isn't looking at the deer. He's glancing sideways at a lady holding a falcon. The falcon is looking right back at him. And the lady? Her embroidered expression is serene. Too serene. It's not the hunt that's interesting here. It's the sideways glance. And someone made sure it was stitched with enough mischief to be noticed. This, you begin to realize, is where the real tapestry gossip lives. Not just in whispered conversation around the looms, but in the hidden symbols, the clever motifs, the sly references that ordinary viewers might miss entirely. A daisy tucked behind a knight's ear? A nod to innocence, or, depending on how it's done, to mocked innocence. A cat sitting with its back turned to a feast table? That could represent betrayal. Or someone's cousin who famously turned down a marriage proposal over a plate of cold stew. Historians still argue whether many of these small choices were intentional acts of protest, inside jokes, or simply the aesthetic whims of talented weavers with too much time and too many opinions. But one thing is certain. These tapestries weren't just decoration. They were coded language, passed through generations by way of silk and flax. There's a myth, well, a rumor passed down through generations of spinsters about a tapestry made in the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Supposedly, it showed the courtly love traditions of the time, lutes, roses, longing gazes, the whole romantic ordeal. But in the corner, barely visible, was a woman alone, snipping a heart in two with a pair of shears. Eleanor, they say, saw it and laughed for 3 full minutes. Now, you're watching 2 women across the room quietly knotting silk into a banner meant for a wedding. One is giggling softly. The other keeps miscounting her stitches. You glance at the pattern. It looks like a traditional vine design at first glance. But look closer. The leaves spell something. Not words exactly, but initials. One set neatly overlaps another, like a tangled love triangle frozen in foliage. And the bride will never notice. In fact, many of the noble recipients of these tapestries, lords, bishops, even monarchs, saw only grandeur and artistry. Rarely did they pick up on the jokes nestled in the foliage, the commentary hidden in a border. It was all too subtle, too quiet, unless you were in the circle. You walked to another loom, this one taller and clearly belonging to a more senior weaver. The tapestry here is of a religious theme. Saint Margaret standing victorious over a dragon. But the dragon, it looks vaguely familiar. Perhaps like the steward who recently imposed a new bread tax. Its beard is oddly specific. Even the saints weren't safe. Here's a fun mainstream tidbit. Some large tapestries took years to complete, often involving teams of weavers working under one designer's instructions. But while the official designs were usually religious or courtly, the weavers often added their own personal touches, tiny flourishes that told a very different story if you knew where to look. You spot a border filled with acorns. Seems innocent enough. Except in this town, acorn is a slang term for a person who's a bit dense but full of confidence. You recall the local knight who commissioned this work? Oh dear. Someone next to you mutters, "I bet she did that on purpose." You don't even ask who she is. You just nod. Of course, not all hidden messages were humorous. Some carried real warnings. There's a record, more legend than history, of a convent in Flanders where the nuns wove a depiction of the Last Supper. Only Judas was embroidered to look like a local merchant accused of cheating the sisters on wool prices. He left town shortly after it was hung in the refectory. And let's not forget the tapestry of St. Agnes, where, for reasons unexplained, the lamb she's holding has two heads, one looking forward, the other back. Interpretations range from divine mystery to a commentary on Count Theobald's contradictory nature. You sit again, now more cautious, glancing at a pattern in progress. It's meant to be a gift for a bishop, an allegorical scene featuring virtues and vices. But the vice labeled sloth is laying in bed with a hairstyle remarkably similar to Lady Alice's. No one says anything aloud, but every woman in the room is smiling just a little. The gentle absurdity of it all is oddly comforting. These women, stuck in a rigid, hierarchical society, used art to speak in ways they couldn't with words. Their tools weren't ink or parchment, but color, texture, and arrangement. They embroidered emotion, nuance, and rumor into their work, and got away with it. You feel the fibers between your fingers. They're soft, but strong. Thread can bind and twist. Someone brings over a tray of warm spiced wine, and the room softens further. Candles sputter gently. The looms have settled into their steady rhythm again. You hear someone hum the beginning of a hymn, but then turn it into a lullaby about a duck who wore shoes to a wedding. You don't ask. Outside, snow begins to fall, dusting the world in quiet. Inside, secrets are being stitched into borders. The workshop grows colder as the morning fades into late afternoon. Shadows lengthen on the flagstone floors, and someone closes a wooden shutter with a creak. But your journey isn't over. Not all tapestries stayed in the rooms where they were born. In fact, some of the most intriguing bits of tapestry gossip didn't just hang quietly on manor walls. They traveled. rolled up and packed with linen, stuffed into saddlebags, or hoisted in wagons. They moved from castle to convent, from abbey to abbey, whispering stories as they went. You're now riding along in a stiff wooden cart between two bolts of unfinished wool and a small chicken who is definitely not thrilled with travel. The cart you're in belongs to a merchant, someone who trades in fine cloth, spices, and the occasional tapestry. The one tucked at the very back. That's no ordinary decoration. It's a gift, a wedding present, if you ask the merchant. But if you look closely, the Garden of Virtues scene contains one too many snakes among the vines and a lion suspiciously wearing a circlet of daisies. Someone, somewhere, is about to receive a gift packed with inside jokes and, if local gossip is to be believed, a few warnings. You arrive at a small convent nestled between two hills. The sisters here are stern-faced, kind-eyed, and very good at pretending not to be interested in worldly things. But once the merchant unrolls the tapestry in their hall, they gather quickly, pointing, whispering, squinting. One young novice blushes and walks away. Another coughs into her veil to hide a laugh. Tapestries were more than pretty wall hangings. In noble and religious circles alike, they served as conversation starters, teaching tools, and sometimes messages with no clear sender. The portable nature of these textiles gave them surprising social reach, spreading gossip not just within a household, but across regions. Historians still argue whether some of the more playful patterns in traveling tapestries were added with the intention to amuse, to shame, or to test the viewer. Was it cheeky or cruel to depict the parable of the prodigal son with what looks like the Duke's youngest nephew feeding pigs? Was it mischief or a political statement? You leave the convent behind and continue to the court of a minor noble family, where the most prized possessions are their hunting dogs, their Italian wine cellar, and a tapestry gifted to them from a Flemish workshop nearly 10 years ago. It's an enormous piece, depicting the triumph of chastity, a popular theme. Women ride unicorns, men are shown being lured away by serpents, and a central figure, likely meant to be Chastity herself, sits atop a white tower. Only her face. You lean closer. That's definitely Lady Marjorie. And the man chained at her feet bears a striking resemblance to her second husband, who disappeared under vaguely explained circumstances. The local baron swears he's never noticed the likeness. But the servants whisper about it constantly. You wander through the castle's smaller rooms. Here, older tapestries hang crookedly, their threads slightly faded, their stories half-remembered. One shows the labors of Hercules, except Hercules has suspiciously floppy shoes, and the lion he defeats looks remarkably like the late steward's dog, Rufus. Some of these works have been here for decades, maybe longer. Over time, their meanings blur. Jokes become symbols. Symbols become mysteries. And sometimes, new gossip forms from old threads. In one corner, a tapestry fragment has been poorly repaired. New thread over old wool. An attempt to cover a damaged spot. But look at that spot closely. There, faint but still legible, are initials, not part of the original border. Hidden inside a tree trunk, maybe a love confession, maybe a signature. Either way, someone left their mark, quietly. Here's a mainstream fact. The famous Bayeux Tapestry, technically embroidery, but let's not get pedantic, is nearly 70 meters long and travels the events leading up to the Norman conquest of England. And even there, amid the scenes of war and politics, scholars have long noted a few unusual inclusions. a man with a strange hat tumbling from a roof, a naked figure pointing to a comet. Were these commentary? Coded messages? Inside jokes no longer understood? Your next stop is a coastal abbey, where tapestries are used to cover the drafty walls and provide a sense of warmth and grandeur. One monk is tasked with mending a piece that came from a noble house now long forgotten. He doesn't know who the original weaver was, but he's sure, he says with a wink, that the fox depicted in the lower corner is doing something very unchristian. He points to another. See that bird? That's not just a bird. That's Brother Thomas. He used to steal eggs. You ask if that's just a local rumor, and the monk grins. Aren't all the best histories? Some tapestries traveled so far from their origins that the gossip embroidered in them became folklore. A tapestry showing a knight and a lady exchanging rings became the inspiration for a tragic romance ballad in a nearby village, despite the fact that the original scene was about a saint accepting martyrdom. Time changes interpretation, and in reverse, sometimes rumors followed the tapestries. One noble family was said to have such scathing tapestries that guests refused to sit near them. Another court banned a Flemish weaver entirely because he'd allegedly hidden unflattering likenesses of royal advisors in every panel he produced. You pause at a roadside inn, where a tattered wall hanging, faded, frayed, and slightly moth-eaten, still manages to spark conversation. A farmer swears the odd-looking goose in the lower right is based on a local legend about a haunted flock. The innkeeper insists it's a joke about her mother-in-law. Either way, it still works. People look, people talk. Back in the cart now, you cradle a smaller tapestry roll, a personal commission from a merchant's daughter to her cousin. It's filled with stars, birds, and fish. But in the border, a line of dancing mice, each wearing a different type of medieval headwear. One of them, unmistakably, wears the hat of the town's notoriously flirtatious fishmonger. Because why not? The journey winds back toward a quieter space now. A small workshop tucked behind an abbey, where the shutters rattle gently, and the windows are fogged with the breath of wool dust and damp weather. You're back indoors. The scent of beeswax candles thicken the air, and this time you're watching a single woman at work. She's old, bent like a shepherd's crook, with a spine that's probably woven from the same stuff as her looms. Sturdy, creaky, and not particularly interested in modern efficiency. Her name is Mirabel, and no one really knows how long she's been weaving. Some say she stitched her first border when Henry II was still teething. Others say she's simply too stubborn to die while threads remain untangled. She hums as she works. No apprentices, no chatty noblewomen, just her loom, and a tapestry that's been on the frame for, well, too long. It's nearly finished now. A massive piece meant to hang in a small cathedral and be admired by generations of clergymen who will likely never guess the full story embroidered into its threads. You settle beside her, watching the final touches unfold. A lamb in the lower right corner, a monk reading beneath a tree, a chalice with, wait, that's not a grapevine motif. That's, oh dear, that's a spiral of eel shapes forming a perfect circle. Local joke? Likely. There was an incident involving an eel cart and a bishop's ankle last spring. The eel won. This is the last stitch, the last message hidden in plain sight. Mirabel's face softens as she knots the thread and smooths the wool. There's a reverence to this moment, like watching someone bury a time capsule with no intention of returning to dig it up. The gossip is stitched. the secret sealed in place, offered not to the viewers, but to time itself. You wander the workshop, running your fingers gently over other finished works, rolled and stored on wooden rods. Some are gifts waiting to be delivered. Others are commissions canceled long ago, yet no one had the heart to unweave them. One shows a man surrounded by dogs. The dogs all wear bells. The man wears a frown. Scholars still debate whether this was meant to mock a particularly noisy hunting party or to symbolize vigilance. Locals say it's just Lord Baron, who once mistook his wife's cat for a fox and chased it through the rose garden. Tapestries outlast those who inspired them. That's the strange truth you begin to feel in your bones. While letters rot and paper burns, wool endures. Linen holds firm. Silk fades, but only a little. The gossip weavers told in their corners, cloaked in symbolism and pattern, has a funny way of slipping through the ages untouched, waiting to be noticed. Historians still argue whether the woman with the green scarf motif that appears in dozens of English tapestries was a recurring saint or just a fashionable noble lady with an unusually memorable wardrobe. Others think she was a character, a kind of private joke passed from weaver to weaver, like a signature without a name. The embroidery itself becomes a sort of ghost, not frightening, just present, reminding us that the past wasn't all sermons and steel. It was also petty feuds over plum preserves, sneaky flirtations during feast days, and long winter nights spent weaving one's opinion into someone else's furniture. And now, the real magic. Over time, these jokes and jabs, these lovingly stitched roasts, became legacy. The lady mocked in the border? She's long gone, but her scandal lives on in wool. The knight who tripped on his own greaves? Forever immortalized in hunting scenes. The flirtatious monk? Still raising eyebrows in the background of a Visitation of Mary tapestry in a church in Normandy. This is how gossip becomes history, not through truth or testimony, but through persistence. And you, dear listener, have become part of it simply by noticing, by paying attention, by seeing the cat where no cat belongs, the leaf with one too many veins, the saint who smirks ever so slightly. Mirabel finishes her work, stands slowly, and gives the loom a final pat. You sense she doesn't need to explain what she's done. You already understand. The story was never on the surface. She stretches, shuffles to the hearth, and takes her seat beside it, just as the other women once did. She sips from a steaming mug, likely nettle and something suspicious, and nods once toward you, as if to say, "Your turn next." Outside, the light is fading. Snowflakes spiral softly past the window, catching on the panes like loose threads, looking for something to hold on to. Inside, the tapestry remains, full of figures, animals, vines, gestures, glances, alive somehow. And in one small corner, nearly hidden by a cluster of embroidered thistles, you swear you see a tiny figure with a goose on a leash. Lady Cecily? Possibly. Or just a joke that wandered too far from its punchline. Either way, it's there. And now, so are you. And now, the looms are still. The workshop lies quiet in the dusk, and the last threads rest softly in their place, no longer taut, no longer waiting. Just sleeping, as all good stories eventually must. You let your eyes trace the gentle curves of the tapestry borders one final time. The vines twist with unhurried grace. The figures seem to breathe in the hush of the room, not frozen, just resting. Like memories that no longer need to be told out loud. Like laughter shared long ago that now echoes only in the silk. The candle gutters low. The walls hold the warmth of wool and whispered tales. You feel the steady stillness of the stone beneath your feet, grounding you, keeping you anchored even as your thoughts begin to float. You're not in the workshop anymore. You're somewhere softer, somewhere quieter, somewhere that remembers you gently and forgets everything else. Let your breath move like thread between fingers. Slow, quiet, careful. Let the world blur at the edges like an old tapestry at twilight. You're safe here, in a place where stories are soft and endings are never harsh, only woven close and left to rest. The gossip is stitched. The day is done. Sleep well.